Hi everybody, we're going to continue reading Who Let the Gods Out. We're going to pick this back up from chapter 7. Chapter 7 being called Prisoner 40 Who? Remember at the end of chapter 6, Virgo and Elliot went to Stonehenge. They got to Stonehenge, but then there was like some guards and they ended up at the Hillstone and they got underneath it and had to jump in to avoid being caught by these security guards. So, chapter 7. Elliot's mum always said that when one door closes, another one opens. Unfortunately, Josie's wisdom did not apply on this occasion. When Elliot threw himself and Virgo into the hole, he'd had no time to worry about what lay beneath the Hillstone. He quickly found out that it wasn't a hole at all. It was a set of stone steps, and he had tumbled down every one of them. Two things prevented him from fracturing every bone in his body. Firstly, there were only 5 steps. Secondly, his fall was broken by a very soft landing. "What have you done?" whispered the soft landing angrily, throwing Elliot off her. I think the soft landing ended up being Virgo, so Virgo had quite a hard landing instead. Elliot spat out a mouthful of dirt. "Saved us from getting clobbered by the security guards you had summoned, mouth of the South," Elliot retorted, hauling his bruised body upright. "We have to leave," Virgo whispered. They both pushed at the Hillstone above their heads. It was immovable. They were trapped. "I can't be here. It's against the rules. I'm supposed to drop the flask in and go." "Looks like the rules will have to deal with it," replied Elliot. Virgo gently put her palms together and then released them to illuminate the cave. They were on a narrow ledge at the top of a winding iron staircase which spiraled down into the endless gloom below. It was surrounded by a stone circle, which Elliot realized was the continuation of the stones from above the ground. "Right," said Virgo shakily. "The most important thing is not to panic. I never panic. Never, never, never. I absolutely never, ever, ever panic. It's vital that I..." "Stop panicking?" asked Elliot. "All right," said Virgo. "I'll go down there and see if there's another exit, but you have to stay here." Elliot did not like being told what to do, particularly when it involved standing alone in a pitch black cave from which he might never escape. Prisoner 42? asked Virgo uncertainly. The man lifted his head from his knees, and fresh tears were streaming down the 1,000 tiny crevices that lined his face. His eyes met Elliot's squarely, and with a look of longing and desperation that made Elliot's heart ache. "Is that what they call me?" he asked. "I don't know who I am anymore." "I've brought you some ambrosia," said Virgo, extending the golden flask with a shaky hand. "Thank you," said the prisoner. "I'm so sorry for scaring you. It's just that you are the first immortal that I have seen in a millennia." A millennia is 1,000 years, so prisoner 42, whoever they may be, hasn't seen anyone really in 1,000 years. His gaze switched to Elliot. "And you are the first mortal? How do we get out of here?" asked Virgo, who seemed to be unable to meet his pleading eyes. "I will tell you, but first, please, could I have some water?" he asked, gesturing at the rustling metal cup at his feet. "I am forbidden," said Virgo quietly. "The rules state..." "Why are you here?" interrupted Elliot. The man gave a weak, pitiful laugh. "The same reason anyone hides anything, child," he smiled sadly. "Because they don't want it to be found." Elliot looked over at the stream. Virgo caught a glance and shook her head. "Elliot, you can't," she warned. "The rules state..." "Your rules," said Elliot, picking up the cup. "Not mine." He walked over to the stream and filled up the cup to the brim with the icy water. He returned to the prisoner and placed the cup at his feet. "You are kind, child," said the man, raising the cup to his lips. He shakily drained it, spilling as much water as he managed to drink. "You've had your water," said Virgo nervously. "Now, can you please show us the way out?" "Behind that boulder," said prisoner 42, pointing at the huge rock on the far side of the cave. "There is a tunnel that leads outside. It's how he left." "He?" asked Elliot. "Zeus," said the man mournfully. "He chained me up here and left me to rot." Virgo ran to the boulder and tried to push it. It was immense and wasn't budging a bit. "I can't move it," she said. "There must be another way." There is none," said the prisoner, declaring and looking straight at Elliot. "But I can move it. Simply free me from my chains." Ooh, don't know what's going to happen. It sounds a bit of a trick, maybe. "Out of the question," said Virgo. The panic was raising in her voice. "We'll stay up here. The council will come for us eventually." "In another 200, maybe 250 years," said the prisoner. "You and I can afford to wait, but I don't think your mortal friend can." "You reckon you can move the boulder?" asked Elliot. "No offence, but you don't look like you work out much," he said to the prisoner. Elliot swallowed back his fear. "Not a chance. I'm coming with you," he replied. "No, you're not. You can't be here." "Well, I am, so get over it." Virgo growled with frustration, but Elliot mustered a determined look upon his face. "Fine," Virgo conceded, "but stay close and don't do anything." Guided by Virgo's faint glow, Elliot edged down the stairs behind the constellation. Their breathing was the only sound to disturb the heavy air. The huge stones were looming high above them with every step that drew them further down into the darkness. They reached the bottom stair and looked nervously at one another before hesitantly placing their feet on the cold floor that lay beneath them. They scanned the cave with faltering movements, afraid of what their eyes might find. "Is that a?" asked Virgo, summoning more stars in her hand. But it was just a stream that ran noiselessly along the back wall. But apart from the old spider scuttling across the floor, the cave appeared to be completely empty. "There's no one here," said Elliot at a normal volume, taking a bolder step into the cave. "You've been tricked." That's not possible," said Virgo, walking towards a dark spot beneath the staircase. "It just doesn't make any "Help me!" screamed a terrified voice. A spectral figure launched itself at Virgo, knocking her to the ground and extinguishing her glow. The cave was plunged into total darkness. "Virgo!" cried Elliot. Where are you?" The silence that greeted his question may have lasted seconds or hours. But what was even more petrifying was the scream that came before it. Elliot had only caught a flash of Virgo's attacker out the corner of his eye. Where was it, and what was it coming for? Was it coming for him? "Virgo!" Elliot shouted. "Virgo, are you here?" A weak glow pierced the darkness as Virgo illuminated her hands once more. She was on the floor, dazed and rubbing her head. I'm here," she croaked, "and that hurt." Elliot ran over to help her to her feet. What was that?" he asked, whipping his head around to see if it was still there. I don't know," said Virgo, looking more urgently about the cave, "but we need to—" A faint sobbing silenced them both. Virgo slowly dropped her hand from her head and pulled her palms apart even further to light up the darkness even more. Elliot peered nervously into the gloom. In rusty iron chains, fastened to a huge rock beneath the staircase, was the most pitiful man, if you could even call him that Elliot had ever seen. The figure was beyond old, ancient in fact, with remnants of a black robe clinging to his skeletal frame. What was left of his grey hair was stuck to his skull, which was buried in his weak limbs. He was huddled, shivering on the cold floor, wrapping his arms around himself, for warmth and comfort. The prisoner laughed his sad laugh again. I am stronger than I look. If you free me, I swear on the sticks that I will help you leave this cave. I think prisoner 42 is referring to the river Styx here. The river Styx is a river that when a Greek person dies, they travel across the river Styx to the afterlife or the underworld. But you can only get to it once you have died. So I think that's what prisoner 42 is doing here. So how are you going to do that? Asked Elliot. I have many powers, said the man. His eyes were now bearing straight into Elliot's soul. Powers that the gods don't understand. Powers that the gods fear. That's why I am here. I can do what the gods cannot. Elliot, don't listen, started Virgo. I understand mortals. The prisoner continued with greater strength in his voice. The intensity of his stare was making Elliot feel as though he was invading his mind, trespassing among his thoughts and intruding on his feelings. I know their dearest hopes. I understand their deepest fears. I understand wanting something so badly your heart might just burst. I understand loving someone so deeply the thought of losing them is worse than death. You know how that feels, don't you, Elliot? Elliot froze. How did he... Elliot, come away from him. Come here. Come and help me, said Virgo. Free me from these chains, pleaded the man desperately, holding up his cuffs towards Elliot. We have both been wronged, but I can help you, Elliot. I can give you what you want most in the world. Just touch here with your hand. A mortal touch, that's all I need to be free. I am begging you, help me. Let me help you. Let me help your mother. You can? He asked. Elliot, don't listen to him, said Virgo, leaving the boulder and breaking into a run towards him. Elliot drew a breath. If this man could read his mind, perhaps then he could help heal his mother's mind. That idea of his mum being back to her old self, back to the happy, healthy woman that he loved and needed, had overwhelmed Elliot. The months of hiding his fears as he watched her slip away from herself started to well up from the pit of his stomach, and Elliot had to force them back down his throat before they burst out of his mouth. The man could cure Mum? That was what Elliot wanted most in the world. That is all he wanted in the world. He raised his fingers towards the chains, but Virgo was at his side. No, don't, she said, grabbing him around his arm. Elliot shook her off as his right foot overtook his left, bringing him closer to the thick iron shackles. Elliot, you can't, Virgo insisted, standing in front of him. The rules clearly state. Elliot stopped and looked into Virgo's terrified face. Her rules, said the man's voice in the cave, or maybe in Elliot's own head. Not your rules, Elliot. There was an eternal pause as Elliot looked from the silver-haired constellation in front of him to the wretched old man that was behind her. I'm sorry, said Elliot. I have no choice. Elliot shoved Virgo to one side and made a frantic dive towards the prisoner.